verses 28 to 34. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he said, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" "This is the most important one," answered Jesus. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." "Well said, teacher," the man replied. "You are right in saying that God is one and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices." When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And from then on, no one dared ask him any more questions.
I was born and bred a Baptist. Not just any old Baptist, by the way. An independent, fundamental Baptist. IFB, baby. I was born in Virginia. And at the time that I was born, my parents attended this church. My mother was a school teacher there. My father coached girls basketball for the Christian school that was associated with that. He also, I believe, was a deacon. Either way, very connected to their church. Right? It was a very influential church at the time in the independent, fundamental Baptist world. My dad actually moved up there to attend the little Bible college that was also associated with this church. Right? It was into that world that I was born. My dad eventually finished his time there, didn't actually finish his degree, that came later, but moved to Florida because of his job, right? And we found another independent fundamental Baptist church based on the recommendation of someone at the previous one in the Tampa Bay area. As I grew up, my dad always talked about wanting to be a pastor, so he finished his Bible degree and started putting his resume out all over the country. Eventually, he got a job offer for a very large, independent, fundamental Baptist church in the Chicago area. So we moved up there when I was about 12. And I went to the Christian school there, of course, right? And I played the sports on the team for the Christian school. My dad was the outreach pastor there. This is the world that I lived in. And I'm talking like inundated with it, right? There was no other world for me. There was no other world for me. Everything I knew about faith, church, Christianity, right? My formative years, everything came from this model of Christianity. I really want you to grasp the picture here, to feel the emotional import of this, because something's coming, right? There's another part to this story. But you got to know the background. You got to feel how this was everything for me. Fundamentalism, and I'm using that term in the sense of fundamental Baptist, is based on this idea, right? That faithfulness to a certain set of doctrines that are called the fundamentals. And faithfulness to God, faithfulness to Christianity is summed up by a strict adherence to those fundamental doctrines. If you don't have those, then you aren't a Christian, right? I was taught that explicitly. Some people who call themselves fundamentalists may not be as harsh as that, but the ones I were around were. You couldn't just be kind of unsure about them either. You had to be strong on the fundamentals. You had to fight for them, right? One of the terms I heard growing up that was used for people, and it was a term of adoration, was he's a militant fundamentalist, right? He's not just a fundamentalist. He'll fight for it, too. There were never any female militant fundamentalists. I don't know, that's something interesting there. It just hit me. He's a militant fundamentalist. And so, from this flows the idea of separation, right? If there's a group that's too soft on the fundamentals, or maybe doesn't even believe one of them, then we separate from them. And that means like no official contact, like ministry-wise. Like you can't partner with them to do a food drive. You can't partner with them to do like a youth rally, right? So growing up, we were taught that like Billy Graham, for instance, was bad because he had friends that were Roman Catholic, right? Many of you have attended, some of you in here have attended this church for a long time. Did you ever think of yourself as a cesspool of liberalism? For those of you that have attended Waters Avenue Baptist Church like your whole life, did you ever consider that your role was the undermining of the faith of Christ? Because that's how we talked about you. That's how my churches talked about churches like this church. Because the Southern Baptist Convention, woo, a bunch of compromisers. The Southern Baptist Convention is well known, right, in the broader world of Christianity as one of the more conservative institutions in America, right? And yet, growing up, I thought they were just way out leftist, crazy nut radicals. Because the people I was around were the crazy nut radicals. This is the world I lived in. And this is the world I loved. And this is the world I wanted to help and participate in and do my part. I understood it. I was good at it. Even as a child. I was eager and excited, and I was naive because I was a child. In my 9th grade year, in my Bible class at my Christian school, right, there's nothing else in my life except for this. There's nothing else in my life except for this world. We went through a systematic theology class. It was the first time that these Bible classes actually were more than just like the stories of them. Yes, I know 9th grade sounds a little late for that, and it was, but for the first time, it wasn't just like the cards with the people on them. It was like we were actually like doing some of the nuts and bolts work of Christianity. And I lit up. I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever heard in my life. Like, I loved theology as soon as I understood it. I loved the connections. I grasped them, and I wanted more. I was like, this is my jam. So I sneak into my dad's office. Sneak's not a good word, but, you know, it feels right. You'll see why. So I go into my dad's office, and I start looking through his books, right? He's got all kinds of commentaries and whatnot. And it was awesome. I found this little small book. It was like 100 pages. It was called like a primer on systematics or something. It was by Louis Burkhoff. I didn't know the name. I didn't know the book. It was my dad's book. Must be okay, right? So, do you get the world yet? Do you feel the world I'm in? You know what some teenage boys are looking for when they go through their dad's stuff, right? Not me. I'm looking for theology books. So I find Louis Burkhoff's primer. And I read this stuff I had never heard before. It was talking about election and predestination and how it's God's decision to give grace to people, and that without God's decision to give that grace, then we would never have come into grace because we would never choose God because we're depraved. And these were words I had never heard before. It made sense to me. It was exciting. It was fresh. I had never heard any of that before. I didn't even know at the time, right, that these were terms that were more heavily emphasized by certain camps. I didn't realize that there were debates. I had never heard of John Calvin or Jacob Arminius. I had never heard of Augustine or Pelagius. I had never heard of Presbyterians. That was a joke. I had never known any of this. So I asked my dad one night. I was like, Dad, what is this? It's so interesting. And he just shut me down so fast. He just said, we don't believe that. And I was like, don't believe what? Well, what is it? Like, how come I've never heard this before? He didn't answer any of my questions. He didn't deal with any of the concerns I had. He just said, no, that's wrong. We don't believe it. And that was it. And I felt really embarrassed and I felt ashamed, and I felt stupid. And in that moment, I knew I would not feel those things ever again. And so I studied Reformed theology, and I got better than my dad, and I got better than all my school teachers, because they were all idiots, right? And as a high schooler, I wrote papers that my teachers couldn't understand. And I would raise my hand in class and argue with them in front of the other students. My dad and I fought a lot more. We'd yell at each other. I would do things that would intentionally make him mad, because if I could preempt it, then I wouldn't have to feel surprised. Right? If I could do what I knew was going to make him mad, at least I'm in control and I don't have to feel like I felt in the car. And then, of course, that becomes your story for everything in life, not just for theology. We all have these events in our lives that shape us, right? And they form us. You aren't born with an identity. You realize that, right? Like, look at a baby. A baby, Lucas, we all know Lucas. He doesn't have any kind of typical reaction to things, right? Babies aren't introverted or extroverted. Babies aren't workaholics. You never hear a baby say things like, I just don't like people in my personal space. If I set my coffee mug here and someone twists it even a little bit, I freak out. Your identity, what it is that makes you, what it is that when you really think about it, defines your typical reactions to things, that's formed out of responses to the times in your life when you felt like something is wrong, when you felt you don't belong, when you feel like you're all alone. Your times in the car. And we know how to protect ourselves, right? We've developed great strategies to avoid that pain. And these look really good sometimes, right? Like in high school, sometimes after that event, I would get praised for being passionate or intelligent. I'd be praised for being like the only high schooler who wanted to start a Bible study. And those did produce some great results for me. But when things don't go the way you want, right, what do those things turn into? I was also accused in high school of being a jerk, of being arrogant, of being condescending. So we get into these cycles of life where we're responding out of pain. And we end up developing these ways that seem to work really well for us, but they also become cages for us. They become walls for us that keep us from truly connecting to other people. They become barriers for us that keep us from really being what we want to be. The story you heard read a moment ago from Keith speaks into this feeling in a really great way, I think. It shows us first like how to live the kind of life where we don't simply live out of reactions to pain or patterns we've always had. It shows us a way to find a life where we're really free. Free to act, free to choose, free to interact with people. Free of fear of failure or fear of getting hurt or fear of whatever else. So the story begins with a scribe, as you heard, and a scribe is someone, of course, who copies down the law, preserves it for the future, and very often made commentary on the law they were copying. So they were very familiar with it. So he comes to Jesus and says, which commandment is the greatest? Right? Of all the commandments, which is the best? Jesus says, love God with all your heart, every part of yourself, etc. And the first cannot stand without the second, love your neighbor as yourself. The scribe says, you're right. And Jesus says, you're right. And then they're done. It's kind of a short little event. And when you read it in the context of the chapter, it's surrounded by some other stories that have a lot more flair to them. But I think that points something out to us, something really deep. The story before the text has the group called the Sadducees coming to Jesus, and they ask him a question, and Jesus like scathingly answers them, and they get all bent out of shape over it. And that's the pattern we're more familiar with Jesus, isn't it? Like when you think about Jesus, and you think about the conversations he had, you typically probably are thinking like the arguments. You're typically probably thinking about how he made people angry. All the conversations that ended with, and so they went away plotting to kill him. Or they knew he was talking about them, and they were mad. Like all this stuff. Religious rulers didn't get along with Jesus, and this story that precedes the one from ours today is no different. Why are there so many stories like that? Why are people always getting into it with Jesus? At the end of the day, right, it was all just fear. Jesus, we're afraid if you keep talking like that, Rome's going to come down on us. Jesus, we're afraid if you keep talking like that, the people are actually going to listen and we're going to lose our power. They're afraid of losing something. They're afraid of looking bad in front of Rome and then Rome coming down and punishing them. So when people come to Jesus, typically, they're not coming out of an honest, inquisitive nature, right? They're coming to trap him. They're coming to ask questions that'll get him to say something so incriminating they can just arrest him and get him out of the way. Or they're saying something that's going to make him look stupid in front of the people so he loses his populist support. They aren't honest questions. They aren't looking to learn from Jesus. They've got an agenda. That's why these stories typically go this way. They already know what they want to hear from Jesus, right? They've already decided on Jesus beforehand. We hear about this guy, and he's doing these crazy things. Let's go check it out. So typically these stories, the religious leaders have questions that are only going to validate their already formed opinion. They're not listening to Jesus. They've already figured it out. Do you do that with people? Do you ever have the classic setup, right, where you ask your spouse a question, and it's not to get any kind of information, but it's so that you can, immediately judge their reaction to the question so that you can confirm the judgment you already made? Or is that just me? I think you know what I'm talking about. You've at least seen it on TV or something. It's the same cycle I would live out with my dad. There's a joke that illustrates this really well. A man gets home one day, right? And he goes and he sits on the couch and he sits in front of the TV, picks up his remote and puts it back down, checks the time, and then calls into his wife, "Hey, honey, can you grab me a beer before it starts?" So she comes, gets him a beer, He's drinking it, whatever. Checks his watch again, picks up the remote. "Oh, hey, babe, can you grab me another beer before it starts?" And now she's in the kitchen. She's thinking to herself, can you get him get your own drink? Come on. So whatever. Still, I'm going to diffuse it. Gets the beer, brings it to her husband. He's sitting on the couch. And now he's 2 in, right? Still hasn't started yet. So he's like, "Hey, honey, can you grab me another beer before it starts?" Now she just blows up. "Why can't you get your own beer? All you do is come home and watch TV. You never help out around here. You would never, help me out. Why do you expect me to help you out?" And the man goes, "And so it starts." That's what we do, right? We set people up, we form an idea of what's going to happen ahead of time, and then we create the scenario so that it will happen. And then we get that good feeling of being right or the good feeling of being a martyr. It could go either way. You can make yourself feel right or make yourself feel wrong, but either way, you're not connecting to the people around you. You're setting people up so that you can avoid the potential pain of relationships. But the scribe in this story does something else, doesn't he? He watches it all go down. If you remember the first line, it says, seeing them argue, he comes forward. So they're all and he comes up and he says, "I got a question." And he does something that isn't typically done. He listens. And it says, hearing that Jesus had given them a good answer. Right now, that's a big deal, isn't it? Think about this for a second. The guy didn't come to this party because Jesus invited him. Right? He's a scribe. He's part of the posse of the Sadducees. Probably their fact check guy. "Jim, is that what Deuteronomy 32:7 actually says?" "Yes, it is." "All right." He's there not to help out Jesus. He's there to help out the Sadducees. But rather than get caught up in what he's supposed to think about Jesus, right, he just listens to the answer. And he heard something that piqued his interest. And so he asks a question. But he doesn't ask it to get a rise from anyone. He doesn't ask it to trick Jesus. He just wants to know what Jesus is thinking. When Jesus says love is the greatest commandment, he's like, yeah, you're right. Now, this is a big deal, right? This is a huge moment for this guy, because think about this. He says, yeah, you're right, Jesus. And you know what? It's better than any of the sacrifices or burnt offerings. It's not a popular opinion at the time to speak against the temple or to put yourself out there as potentially speaking against the temple. And so to say that love is greater than sacrifice could definitely be taken as slighting the temple system. Secondly, even the question's a little edgy. It's a little dangerous. It's a little putting himself out there for his friends, because the gotcha answer to Jesus' answer would have been, all commandments are equal because they all come from God. This man has blasphemed, he has spoken ill of Moses, and he has spoken ill of the law, and he has spoken ill of the temple. Round him up. Those are basically the charges that were, to no avail, brought against Jesus originally, if you remember. He could have said those things. Could have accused Jesus of blaspheming God by making him a liar because all laws are equal. But he just says, yeah, you're right. You're right. Love is the greatest. And so then Jesus says, hey, you're right there, man. He listens back, doesn't he? He doesn't say, like, so what are you hanging out with these losers for, right? Are you going to change your career now? You going to come and follow me? He just says, hey, you're not far from the kingdom. You're not far removed. The word is like, you're no stranger to it, right? You're not an alien to it. You're a citizen of it. It's very close for you. What a great ending, right? No drama, like some of the other stories. Wouldn't you rather your interactions go that way? Like, wouldn't you rather be Jesus and the scribe than Jesus and the Sadducees? I would. I want a life of connection with others rather than fear and assuming that we're all out to get each other. I don't want to move through life assuming that others are out to get me and then responding to that feeling. So what do? It's a really easy thing. Listen. Learn to listen, like the scribe. Learn to listen to others for what they're actually saying to you and actually doing, rather than what you're making them out to be. And that sounds wonderful, I understand. But how do we do it? Rather than just naturally snapping into our judgments we've made. Because it's immediate, isn't it? We talked about it earlier in the first hour, that like very often our life just feels like stimulus response. It feels like there's no space between the moment someone says something to me and the moment I say something back. How do you change something that feels so natural? The first step then is to truly listening to others, is to listen to yourself. Be attentive to what's happening within you. Take just a second to assess how you feel about something or someone before responding. I want you to pick someone this week. Get in your head. Write it down. Put it on your phone. Pick someone, anyone at all, that you normally would come into contact with. Your husband, your wife, a friend, a coworker. And this week, when you interact with them, stay alert. Go in thinking, I'm going to listen to what's happening inside me when I'm with this person. Watch for times you feel uncomfortable. Watch for the times when maybe you get angry for some reason, even though they didn't do anything to you. Watch maybe for the times where you feel like you're pulling back from them, like you're afraid to tell them something. Listen for those times. Even if you have to do something crazy. Even if you have to stop in your tracks, right? Even if like you're in the middle of something, you and your wife are talking, and suddenly this comes back to you a little bit, and you say, hold on a second. And you turn around and you're like, why am I so nervous? Why am I... Okay, that's it. Take a break. Physically take a break from it. Probe it out. You'll probably find something out about yourself, right? You'll probably find something that you're afraid of, something that you're worried about. Walk through the steps. Why would I feel this way about this person? You might find some knowledge, and in that knowledge, right, the knowledge that you're acting from something inside of you, not from something they're doing, as you've told yourself so many times before. Out of that knowledge, you'll find freedom, a new way to respond. Don't let fear get you. Because it can, right? Fear can stop us from these things. I had, Matt actually told me a story the other day. I thought it was really cool. Pretty convicting. He said he was at a gas station the other day, and this guy was handing out tracts. And when I said a guy handing out tracts, did you have a reaction? Okay. Be alert to that. There's a guy handing out tracts. I had the same reaction probably as well. You're like, oh, brother, this guy? What a loser, right? Handing out tracts. And Matt said everyone he saw was kind of doing the same thing as now, like leave me alone, guy, whatever. And he was watching him. He said the guy looked super friendly. Wasn't one of the bullhorn guys. Just handing out his tracts, being nice, smiling at people. So Matt said he went up to him and he said hey, I see that you're doing this because you care about people. Thank you for that care. I'll take one of your tracts. How does that make you feel? Is your first reaction like mine? Is it a fearful reaction yeah, but what if he thinks I'm validating him then when I actually don't agree with his doctrine? What if someone else sees me and thinks I'm part of his group, and then they'll think I'm dumb? Right? That's all just fear. You can be more than that. You don't have to keep living out the times in the car with your dad. Listen to someone this week. Try it out. You may even find, like the scribe and Jesus, that you had common ground with someone that you didn't think you did. You might find love in that interaction. And when you do that, as Jesus said, you'll be walking into God's kingdom. Let's pray. God, grant us that we may let go of our fears. Give us the courage to face and recognize the things we've been telling ourselves about other people. Give us that space, that just momentary glimmer of awareness that can give us the freedom to act. We thank you for these things. We know you'll do them. Amen. On the night Jesus was betrayed, he took bread, he took wine, he gave thanks for them and blessed them. He said, as often as you take this bread, as often as you drink this wine, do it in remembrance of me. A lot of times I try to connect this in some way to what I talked about, or I like to expand on it, but Emily's going to sing a song for us that really does all that. It's called The Table. So as you are taking this, listen to that song, dwell on its words, let it shape you.